for coming. And I thank our sponsors, which is Epson, Photo Shelter, Archive, Pro Photo Daily, and American Photography. So tonight starts a full week of discussing the issues of guns in America and all the craziness around it. And we have a great week set up. There's one interesting fact. What I want to do is each night just not get into the weeds, but just one interesting fact. In 2020, over 45,000 people died that year of guns. And 53 people a day are killed by a firearm in the States. They're just like those kind of numbers are just really crazy. If you hear too many of them, then they just sort of dissipate. But just those two little facts. So each night, I'll put something in like that. So on Friday we have Ned Zelson and Charisse May. On Thursday we have Barbara Davidson. On Wednesday we have our dear friend John Lowenstein and Kathy Shore. Tomorrow we have Carlos Javier Ortez, and tonight we have my friend David Butow, who is all yours, David. Thank you very much for doing this on such short notice as well.
My pleasure, Frank, and thank you for inviting me. And it's good to see you, John. It's good to see, I think Youngie is, or no, sorry, that's not Youngie. That's a different Kim, but good to see everybody. I'm here to show work from Uvalde, Texas. I went there the day after the shooting happened, and when I came back, I started thinking that I've actually been going to these school shootings for over 20 years, and I was reminded that I went to Columbine also the day that happened. I had to look up like what year that was. It was 1999. So it's really disheartening, in many ways to think of, it's not only like things haven't gotten any better. In some ways, it seems like things have gotten worse, and just the threshold for sort of what constitutes now a national news story that's going to draw in the attention of the big network anchors and have them, fly into these cities to do the stories after these shootings. That like the benchmark for that, it's almost like it keeps getting raised all the time after every one of these. And, my concern is that we can get numb to this after a while. And fortunately, it looks like, over the weekend, there was some legislation passed. So there's some sort of progress on some level, but it's just really sad. That's really the predominant kind of feeling I have about the whole thing. And this is not something obviously I like to cover or I enjoy it, but I felt that it was just important to go to Texas. The day that it happened, I had an assignment the following day, a portrait assignment, and so I couldn't leave in Los Angeles, and I couldn't leave right away. But I talked to with my agent Marcel Saba at Redux, and we both decided it would be a good idea to go after that assignment the next day. And then when I got to Texas, I ended up getting a couple assignment days from Time Magazine to do some specific things. But on the way down, while I was flying into the state, I decided that I wanted to work in black and white. Lately I've been doing almost everything in color, but every now and then I'm motivated to shoot in black and white because, especially things that have been, that are getting a lot of news coverage, because I think it's an opportunity to maybe provide just kind of a fresh look, just a different way of looking at something that just the general public has already been seeing for a couple of days in color on television and on news websites and still photos. So that's what I'm going to show you today.
Well, David, let me just ask you. Your earlier comment about we're getting numb to it. Is it now? Do you think like we have to get over 10 or over 15 people being killed for it to be like a big enough story? Like 4 kids doesn't matter anymore.
Right.
It's as crazy as that sounds.
It's crazy as it sounds. It's horrible to think about it that way, but in a sense, I think it's true. I don't know what the number is, but that's sort of like, if you think about just, There's sort of two ways of like in the immediate aftermath of an event like this, you can kind of think of it as like there are two ways, two lenses that people are looking at these situations, and one is the sort of public policy slash social way of looking at it, was this is a problem, and how do we deal with this? And the other way is like as a news story, right?
Right.
Where the major news organizations are going to cover this. And so the definition of news is stuff that's kind of like it doesn't usually happen, or maybe hasn't happened so much. And that's how these news organizations to decide. That's the metric that they use to decide how much resources they want to put into something. So if there's some shooting and 2 or 3 people have gotten killed, I think, well, that happens all the time. We don't even need to bother
Right.
with it.
That's what I mean. Like if
Yeah.
you were trying to sell them the story, I happen to be in Texas, and this other thing, happened in Oklahoma. I can get there. The editor may say to you, "There's only 3 people dead. Who's going? Who cares about that?" Right?
Yeah.
I mean, you're going
Yeah.
to have that kind of a miserable conversation.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, a truly miserable conversation. So I'm gonna put this up now. Let's see. Okay. So this is a screenshot from the web, and I was just before we had these technical problems, I was just saying that after I came back from Texas, when I got back to Los Angeles, I was reading a news story about other school shootings, and I saw this picture of mine right here. And at first I thought it was Columbine because it has that dated look to it, right? And because I'd been thinking about having gone to Columbine in 1999, but this is actually a year before that. This is in Springfield, Oregon. And in this case, I think it was a high school, and I believe two students were killed at the school. So I was living in LA at the time, and I was a contract photographer with US News and World Report magazine, which at the time was a weekly news magazine. And to your point, Frank, this was a big enough news story that US News, sent me from LA to Oregon to do this story. And I wonder today if
Right? That wouldn't happen. No way.
you know, um,
How
so
scary.
it was sort of chilling seeing this, and it's in black and white because that's how it was on the website. I mean, I photographed it in color, and the original scan is in color and everything, but I think this was from it was either Yahoo or MSNBC story or something, and they had converted all these older photos to black and white, and then had some stuff from Uvalde in there as well. But yeah, so one of the things I thought about, when I'm as a photographer going to work on these stories, I'm not really going to cover a school shooting. I'm there to photograph the aftermath of something like that, and no matter what kind of scenes you might encounter and how compelling they might be, nothing will even come remotely close to showing the horror of actually what's happened. And you can only read about these things later. Some of the descriptions of the scenes inside the classrooms after something like that. It's just, it boggles the mind, and it's almost too horrible. Like you don't even want to think about it. So what you have available to you as a photographer or as a media person to actually see and communicate and interpret, and then project out for other people to see, are these sorts of scenes, like with balloons and stuffed animals and things like that. And I'm very curious to know what the rest of you think about this, just as people who who experience these kind of events, looking at photographs and images on TV. If to me, like when I was there, I just had this kind of title in my head, which was American Ritual, and I thought, I've been to a few of these now, and it's sort of, they all take on a very similar quality to them. And I think we can go ahead and start advancing through the pictures
So,
now.
so David, can you give us how it is mentally, the difference between this and covering Ukraine and seeing death and destruction?
Mm. Well, when I was when I was in Ukraine, I actually personally didn't. I saw a couple of funerals. I didn't really see death and destruction myself because I wasn't close to the front line. But I've done other things like that, where it is a more visceral experience, and the pictures reflect that. And then the viewer gets communicated a more direct impression of what the event really was about. But but with these school shootings, of course, because we're talking about children and privacy and just um, the aftermath of a crime scene like that, you're just not going to get the kinds of pictures that you might see from a war zone. And so I think as a result, what the public is seeing and what I'm seeing too is really just the ritual of the aftermath. So you have occasionally, like the woman here and her son, they both knew well one of the teachers who was killed. I talked to them after I took pictures of them, and they sort of told me the backstory. The son had one of the teachers as his teacher when he'd gone to school there, and the mother was pretty good friends with the family. And they actually gave me the news, which sort of came out later in the day, that earlier in the day when I took this picture, the husband of the teacher that they were talking about came to the school to bring flowers to the school, to the memorial there. And by the end of the day, he had died from a heart attack. Right. So at the time that I was talking to them, this guy had just been a couple of hours, and he had just passed away from a heart attack, from the grief and the stress. I think they had three or four children, this couple. So it's sort of like, the collateral damage of this event just kept going. It kept spreading out.
Yeah, and David, from the people there, how does it break down, or part of the conversation are they immediately hating and wanting to kill the shooter, or does it go to we need stronger laws? Like, do they look at that shooter as someone sick and deranged and we need stronger, or like, what, can you give us anything around that?
I don't think I had any conversations with anybody there that about that. I think in the community itself, I think everything is so raw that the predominant emotion and the way people are thinking about it is really sadness. And I don't think I don't think there'd been enough distance that people were thinking about it like from a public policy perspective.
Yeah. Good question.
Yeah, and so it's interesting too, because this is Texas, and it's it's a pro-gun state in general. And so the culture in South Texas of, I think maybe we can start to maybe move through the frames a little bit. I think maybe the next picture or the one after that, this is something that I saw when I was driving into the town. Like I'm on my way, the one before that, from San Antonio to Uvalde, which is about an hour and a half's drive, and I saw the billboard off the side of the highway for guns. That's just so commonplace, especially in that part of the state. It's a pretty rural environment. So just the gun culture is just, it's just, people don't really even give that stuff a second thought there. Maybe they will now, I don't know, but it's very much ingrained into the culture. And so I think that, for a lot of those people, they don't, I think, to your point, Frank, I think they see it less as a gun issue than as a mental health issue or something. But of course, this thing, this just doesn't happen with this kind of regularity in other countries. So so let's
next slide,
go to the next frame or two. So this is one of the last pictures I took when I was in town. So this is not in chronological order, but when I first arrived in Uvalde, the first thing I did was go to the school. And so the way the police had set up the perimeter, there were small crosses that had already been placed in the yard kind of the school, and people had already started to bring flowers, but the media and just the general public was not allowed to go up there at that point. So sometimes they were handing flowers to police officers, who would then take the flowers and put them by the crosses. But on the last day I was there, I think it was Sunday, they had started to let in, the police had started to let in just ordinary people who wanted to get closer to the school. So I was able to kind of just like walk in and join some of those people, which is where I took that picture. And this guy had just brought that large cross, like literally by hand. It was like on rollers, and he brought it and set it down in front of the school. And then you can see, like on the left side of the frame, that's a photograph, an enlarged photograph of one of the children who was killed. So let's go to the next frame. Yeah. And so this, this was a scene a day or two after I got there that, it's just that, I really wanted to photograph the media. I was very, I was really interested primarily in showing people what it actually looks like in a broad way, in a complete way, in the aftermath of these shootings. And, there'd been a lot of very good dramatic news pictures in the hours after the shooting, showing people concerned and grieving and things like that. That wasn't quite happening when I was there, but there were all these other things that I think you just don't normally see when you look at coverage of these events. But for me, from my personal experience, this is something that I've seen every time, that I've gone to one of these. You have this weird combination of media and then just general, ordinary citizens, and maybe who didn't know people from the school, but some of them did, like in the case of the people in the first picture that we saw, the mother and son, where they wanted to bring flowers. So yeah, let's go into the next frame or two here. Yeah, so you can see those crosses. It's like one of the first pictures I took. And after 2 or 3 days, like the flowers, it just piled high.
Yeah, it's interesting, David, how you talk about ritual. Like, now I feel for myself like I'm removed from this, and like you have these shootings, and then somebody, it's almost like the way they prepare for graduation or for the soccer tournament, or who's going to do the crosses, who's going to do the balloons, where are we going to put the flowers. Like somebody from the school, the moms are organizing, right? As if it's just another event.
Yes.
Because those signs, I mean, they're beautiful, but like who contacted who, make sure we get everyone's name right. All
Yes.
that crap, that, if you spelt the kid's name wrong on, the soccer program for the game, you'd have a crisis on your hands. And it's the same sort of mechanism that these schools all of a sudden are doing it again.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, mechanism, I think that's it, because it's in the sense that it's a ritual. And so people, it's like they already know what needs to be done, even though this is the first time that's happened there. It's the first time that's happened in that town, in that school. But yet these people have already seen all these other incidents like this before. So they're compelled to do exactly the same thing, as well-intentioned as it is. And I'm not,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it's like, I saw people there. I talked to people from other parts of Texas who had no personal connection with that town or with anybody who was a victim in this, but they themselves felt compelled to drive there. And we could maybe go to the next frame, and bring flowers or bring stuffed animals. And it's just the scene, just like just like we saw in the very first picture from Springfield, Oregon. It's like it just gets repeated over and over and over again.
Yeah, and David, can you give us a sense of the community, middle class, below middle class, like just, just that piece of it as you drove through?
Yeah, I would say it's pretty blue collar in that town. It's very, very predominantly Mexican American. It's pretty close to the border of Texas. It's about maybe like an hour and a half's drive from the border. and or even less, actually. There are parts of it that are probably even closer, but you know, that part of the state of Texas, I mean, you know, and I grew up in Dallas, so I have some familiarity with it, but it's, I mean, the Mexican American culture is very much a part of the state. I mean, these are, in, you know, a lot of cases, these are people who've been there for generations. So they really consider themselves Texans, you know, and they consider themselves American, but there's still a lot of this sort of Mexican and kind of Catholic traditions that are part of that experience. Yeah, so this was, I forget if this is a reporter from, it's either ABC or NBC, but you can see that they're kind of encamped, you know, it's right across from the school, and they're in a yard, and the network, I learned, rented the house, which included the yard, for several days, like literally for thousands and thousands of dollars, like I was told. So they could have their own, sort of space there, you know. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, and that's what the producer does, right? You go to a location, you know, get us proximity, on and
Right.
on and on.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
let's go ahead and advance then, please, Jay. So yeah, again, you know, the Catholic tradition, very strong there. Go ahead. Yeah. Yeah, maybe Jay, you can just, instead of waiting for me to mention it, you could just sort of cycle through a little bit. So yeah, this gives you an idea. This was the vantage point from across the street. So this is like a 50mm lens. So you're pretty close, but most of the time you're not, you know, you're not able to go right where all that stuff is. But yeah, Frank, just like you said, I mean, just the logistics, the mechanics of putting all this stuff there, getting all the kids' names on all these identical crosses. And
And
I mean,
the teachers.
yeah, and the teachers, exactly, because there were 2 teachers, I believe it was, that were killed. And so, you know, I'm just kind of, if anybody wants to weigh in on this, please feel free. I'm just very curious about what people think about the just conceptually, sort of, I mean, with the best intentions, but somehow kind of in the process of memorializing these lives, there's sort of a beautification that happens, right? You know, because of the flowers and the cute animals and the balloons and things like that, which to me is just, it's the opposite of what actually happened, you know, and what the reality is.
And that's a determining factor for you to shoot color or black and white, David?
It was something that I was thinking about at the time, because like having been to, you know, I mean, you know, there were at least two school shootings around, you know, the late 90s, 2000s. So Springfield, Columbine, I went to. The scenes were very similar. I went to the Pulse nightclub shooting in Orlando, Florida, which was, you know, maybe 6 or 7 years ago, something like that, maybe a little bit more. And I'd done all those in color. I was on assignment, did them in color, but I just didn't want to do that again. I just felt like it needed some other kind of treatment. And, you know, this is a young woman who'd driven from Houston with a friend of hers, you know, and these are 2 media people who were just interviewing her on her iPhone. And she had no personal connection to the shooting at all. But she was compelled to come and bring those flowers, you know.
David, you unearthed a memory. I remember in my own family, we lost a cousin many years ago, but she was young. And I can remember my parents speaking about what they were going to wear. And when you have a kid passing away, it was more colors than an elderly person where you always wore black. You know, and you know, we're Roman Catholic, so just sort of normal in that vein. But I can remember, you know, like you're celebrating the child.
Yes.
You know, it's a different than somebody who's in their late 80s, you know, for instance. It's just an interesting thing that I haven't thought about that in a long time.
Yeah, that is really interesting. And I think that there's a parallel in these situations, because you do want to celebrate the life of a child that's been
Always,
cut
right?
short like this, right? You want to recognize that they are a child and it wasn't their time. And so it's sort of like, how do you do that? How do you remember them and honor them and celebrate their life and the, you know, and who they were?
So,
And go ahead. So
no, no, I'm sorry. So this is right by the school. This shot.
this is right by the school. So I think the shooting was on a Tuesday, and I believe I took this on Saturday. So, you know, it's a day off for a lot of people. So what had been a line of maybe like 10 people waiting, sort of go through the police barricades to drop off flowers, you know, it was more like an hour long line, you know, with like 100 people in it, you know, because of the weekend. But yeah.
And any conversation around like the woman in the front there who had her own young child with her, you know, with the dog there.
Well, you know, one of the things I saw a lot was people who did bring their children with them. They kept those children close to them. You know, you would
Mm.
often see sort of like the family that we saw in a few frames ago. You know, they pull their children close, and I have no idea, you know, how they might talk about this with their kids. But you know, it's horrible to think too that a lot of these kids, they have to go through these shooting drills at schools now. I mean,
Yeah.
no, I can't imagine that. But just the whole concept of what happened, it should be just completely foreign to them and unimaginable, but I'm afraid that it isn't.
No.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's keep going then. Yeah. We're probably about maybe not quite a half of the way through. Yeah. So this was sort of like a motorcycle gang of, you know, religious, it was like a Christian oriented motorcycle gang that came out on, I think it was on Sunday, and did these sort of like impromptu prayers. So this is, again, this is all happening right across the street from the school. Let's go ahead. Media across the street. Go ahead. This is a reporter from a Spanish television station.
Yeah. So by Saturday, David, everyone was able to get pretty close.
Yeah, well, it was about the same actually from when I first got there.
Oh,
You could get right across the street, but they were starting by the weekend, they were starting to let people cross through those barricades that you see in the foreground of this picture. Not the media. I kind of went in with a group of people. In fact, with that motorcycle gang, they were let in all at once, like 20 or 30 of them, and I happened to be standing right next to them as they were let in, so I just walked in with them, you know, and made a pretty quick exit after a few pictures. Let's go ahead. Yeah, so this is, you know, this is something that you're probably not going to see on TV when people are talking about these events, but this is exactly what you see when you get there. You know, before you get to the school, before you see the flowers and the balloons and all that, and you're seeing the direct reaction from the public to the event. You see media, you see the, you know, all this stuff getting rolled out of trucks and stuff.
mm,
You know, and then a family who'd come just to see the scene.
mm.
One evening right across the street from the school. So I think we're just a little more than halfway through the photos, and I believe the next one is going to begin with a scene not by the school. This is close to the school. It's a small town, but this is in a park that's in the middle of town. And another set of crosses, one representing every victim, had been set up in the park. And I think this was the second afternoon I was there. These parents came with kids who I'm pretty sure were from the school.
Mm.
And it
How
was
long were you there, David?
it's a terrible scene. I was there, I think, for 5 days. Yeah. Yeah. So, and this was a group of Mennonites that came, and they sang. This was at that park again. The next series of pictures is all from the park, which became sort of like, other than the school, it became like the center of activity for people who wanted to come to the town or find people that they might know from the town, and just kind of get in touch with the event on some level, because they had a personal connection, or they felt compelled to do it. Okay, let's keep going then. Yeah. All right.
And is it, is it blistering hot there too, David?
It's pretty hot. It was like, yeah, pretty much 100 degrees ish most of the days. I'm just looking at the chats as we're going along. Okay. Hi, thanks for coming. What do you shoot? Okay, I'm sorry. I don't think that was directed at me. Yeah, it's interesting. Somebody wrote, it's horrible and tragic, yet has become as routine that it's easy to become somewhat numb to it all, sadly. And I think that's really, I think that's right. And I mean, fortunately, there has been maybe more discussion about some bipartisan support for gun legislation after this event. But I mean, if you look at what they did, it's pretty minor.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is, it was interesting because this is at the park, and on the weekend, the park kind of turned into this de facto, like a series of like prayer groups, and almost like it almost had like a revival atmosphere to it, with some of the the groups that came were more sort of evangelical and revival oriented, and some were not. Some were more, let's say down tempo. But all of this is occurring not necessarily as a result of what happened, but it just, the town sort of gets taken over by a new kind of energy because of the event. Okay. And then one of the assignments I had was to go to a few churches on Sunday morning with a reporter. So I think the last 2 or 3 pictures are from the churches. So this particular church that we went to, there were 2 children that had personal connections to the church. They had family members who attended there, and so that's why their pictures are being shown at that church. And one of the former pastors from the church, it was his granddaughter who was killed. She's the one on the left.
Really, in a town like this, David, everyone has to know somebody, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so yeah, so like, I think that's why I just couldn't have a conversation with anybody about what they thought should be done about stuff like this. I mean, it was all just too close and too personal to everyone. And 2 or 3 of the people in this photo are from another town, from another church, that I don't think there was like some previous connections so much, but they were in touch with the pastor from the church where I took this picture, and just as sort of a sense of solidarity, they drove into town to kind of share the experience with people, with local people. I thought that was a really sweet gesture. Just the sense of community. And then Biden showed up on that Sunday, and so this is his motorcade going through town. I think he went to a mass at one of the large churches in town, and then was on his way to meet privately with members of with some family. And
that's also your routine now as well, right?
Exactly. So to me, that's kind of part of the ritual now, is that if it's a big enough event, enough people have died that it merits a presidential visit. I mean, certainly Sandy Hook, right? I mean, Obama was president. The
Yeah.
Parkland shooting, I don't remember actually if that was Obama or if that happened when Trump was president, but. And then this is the last frame here. Yeah, I see a few familiar names. Charisse, thank you for joining. I look forward to seeing you on Friday. Sid and Michelle from Monroe Gallery, Alex. Yeah, thanks everyone for tuning in. I really appreciate it. And I'm sorry that it's such a depressing subject.
No, but like this, this and this whole week, like what's the sort of call to action? What gets regular folks like us who intellectualize it, right, into doing something.
Mm-hmm.
Like calling a congressman, calling your senator to do something.
After he just did that.
Great. Who was that? Yeah, I don't know who was speaking there, but yeah, it's
Yeah, well, yeah, and it's been what now about 3 weeks after this has happened. So the fact that we're now spending that you're spending a week on the subject so that it stays on people's minds. I think that's really important. I think that's what it takes. So
everyone's got, yeah. If we all do something, because it's so easy to be cynical, and the politicians don't listen to us, and on and on and on, and they don't. But yeah, it's just very crazy, a very, very crazy set of circumstances. But if anyone else has a comment, Jay, open it up for anyone, or the chat room is there. I can't thank you enough, David, for doing this, and because that's why you go and cover these events, is to enlighten us and to make us do something, with your empathy and with your imagery, and that's
David, I
otherwise we
think,
wouldn't know.
sorry,
Yeah,
David,
go,
the
Ellen.
one that you showed, I'm sure everybody had the same emotional reaction of the children and the people hugging in the middle of whatever you were showing, has such a visual impact that I just imagine if it was on a huge poster someplace or somebody, that one. Do you know which one I'm talking about?
yeah, the one with it's like a telephoto shot with the 3 crosses and the children behind the cross.
Yeah, that one. I
Yeah.
think, and doing it in black and white, it doesn't, I mean, I so get it. You don't need the color. The color distracts from the emotional response that I, as the viewer, have. It hits to the core of, I think. I know that wasn't what you were going for the other ones, but this truly has an impact.
Well, thank you. And the way I mean, the way I see it is as difficult as it is to look at a picture like this. It's just only the hint of the true, horror of the situation, and anything that helps us get closer to the reality of that, I think is important. So yeah, I mean, yeah, thank you for saying that. I appreciate that. I mean, I was glad to see that the New York Times used this photo for an editorial about, it was a couple of days later, just sort of about school shootings and gun violence in general. So it's like, I'm hoping that like pictures like that can, you're not thinking of it just as one specific event, one shooting, but it's just the whole issue more broadly and how it impacts people. So thanks.
And the other piece of this is with all of these shootings, nobody is immune to it. Everyone has a chance, right? It's whether it's a wealthy neighborhood in Sandy Hook, or a club or a school or a concert. Which should even make the nation be galvanized even more, that it's not just those people that it's happening to. It's happening to every one of us. I mean that town has got to be in the middle of nowhere, huh, David?
Yeah, it's in the middle of nowhere. Yeah.
right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's just, yeah, it is,
Yeah.
it is just.
And you always hear, after this, it's like people from the community always say, we never thought it would happen here. But of course it can happen anywhere. And it's,
It's
you know,
happening everywhere.
yeah. And I mean, it's the other countries, this does happen on occasion, but it doesn't happen with near the regularity that happens in the United States. And so that's why I want to go and do this, because
Yeah.
that question has to be asked, why that is. And, it has to do with guns, and it has to do, there's something about society too, that this particular type of gun violence seems to be particularly American. And
Yeah.
so, yeah.
Jay has a question. Jay?
David, what's your process like? I'm sure like something like this, a tough project like this is probably very, very stressful for the mind and everything. When you come home, is there like a ritual that you do just to be able to come back and just like be able to cope after seeing so much horrible things?
Well, what I did in this case was I assembled the pictures that I had done, and a way I was trying to make sort of a cohesive point with it, which is more or less what I've showed today. Because when I'm there, like every day, I'm sort of like thinking of it separately, like, oh, this is what I got yesterday. And then, there's new things to photograph the next day. And then I have to go to some churches. So it's sort of like this piecemeal approach. But then when I get back, and in fact, even on the airplane, when I was flying home, I started looking at these and trying to, so a lot of it is I channel it. I channel the anger that I have and the sadness that I have. I channel that with the work, through the work. And that's the reason why I go, just to add one little drop of information that might contribute to the dialogue on the subject. So I was, I mean, sometimes I'm shaken by things that I've seen that didn't really happen in this case, because I didn't see anything that was all that disturbing, but just the idea of it, it just made me mad more than anything else, So
Yeah. And David, just from the way you work photographically, do you ever think, with the projects that you cover, I'll go back in 2 years or 5 years from now, I should go back? Do you ever think of that? I mean, and that wouldn't be maybe the newspapers, no one may be interested, but for you in your own, your own head.
I do think about that sometimes. And then, I mean, I'm not sure I've ever really done that. We talked a little bit about that when I showed the Ukraine work. Somehow there's something that I end up talking myself out of it sometimes, but I do, I do think about what happens to these communities and what happens to these people. And
so what talked you out of it?
Sometimes I see somebody else has done it, just maybe in and also I think that there's I think that's a situation where you have to work with a writer, because like I don't think the photographs can give you enough context, because the pictures aren't going to have that immediacy. So you really need the backstory, and you really need a way for the subjects of in the photos to be able to present their own voices and their own history and feelings and experiences, over that time. So it's a very different process than just going in as a photographer. So I think if I had, if I knew the right writer, who was interested in approaching it, then it could work, So.
And now, again, getting back to that theme of ritual, now that town has to decide, do they raise that school? What do they do? I mean, can you send kids back in there? Can you send teachers in there?
Yeah, well, I tell you, it's a pretty, it's not a wealthy community, and I'm sure they're not going to tear down that school. It's a relatively new looking school. I mean, maybe 70s or 80s or something like that. So, yeah, no, they're going to go back in that school in the fall, I'm sure. Yeah. No.
Yeah. And is that, is that sort of fair to an economically distressed community to have to do that?
Right. Well, it's interesting too, because like after maybe like the third day I was there or something, the governor, Greg Abbott, came with some other state officials, for a press conference that they had in a civic center there in town. And so they were talking about, he didn't want to talk about the gun laws in Texas, that he was, whatever gun laws there are, that he was encouraging people like 2 or 3 years ago to go out and buy guns. He tweeted about this. He didn't want to talk about that. He wanted to talk about all the resources the state was going to put into the immediate aftermath of this. But that a couple of years from now, that's going to be, the money's going to be gone, and, the town itself is going to be left to sort of deal with this, on their own.
Yeah. Well, David, you started us off just where we needed to be. And I cannot tell you how much I appreciate you shedding all your personal skin in coming on and sharing with us. So I appreciate that very much. For everyone else, we have a whole week of compelling stories, and tell a friend, more people that can get motivated, the better. And if anyone else has any questions or comments, put them in the chat room or speak to David directly. But we really appreciate it. Jay, again, thanks, David. You're a mensch.
Okay, thank you, Frank. And thanks everyone for joining. Sorry about the technical problems earlier, but I look forward to seeing everybody later in the week. So take care,
Very
everyone.
eloquent.
Yeah.
Very
Yeah.
eloquent.
Thank you.
Diane.
I don't know who that was, but okay, thank you. All
Very,
right.
very nice.
Yeah.
All right. Good night, everyone.
Cheers.
Thank-
Good night.